Welcome to another episode of our unique NUFC podcast. After another away win in the capital, the Toon are showing they can find a way. Third in the Premier League and now up against another form team in the table. It's Villa away. Welcome to Black and White with Arab News.
The ball back, Joe Linton onto Wilson, into the area, Callum Wilson on his left, Alexander Isak! Oh, what a goal! What a hit from Isak! They've turned it around! Alexander Isak with a glorious finish from the edge of the area into the top of the net. It's Brentford 1, Newcastle United 2.
Today's guest made over 500 top-flight appearances, including 50 for tomorrow's opponents. It's the excellent Neil Cox. But before we meet him, it's a warm welcome back to our own champion of predictions, that is, and of course, sports editor of Arab News, Ali Khaled. Ali, something that's ringing in my ears from you is the top teams find a way. It's a phrase I often hear. The Toon found a way the last time out.
They did, Pete. It was great result, I think, because they were up against a team in Brentford who has been playing quite well. They've had some really big results at home against some of the big teams. The game against Liverpool obviously springs to mind. Game against Manchester United at the start of the season. So really, really difficult away game. And also, the second of 3 consecutive away games for Newcastle, as it happens. And now they've won 2 out of 3. And again, you think, I think the standards are a lot higher at Newcastle now, but you look at 3 away games and you think, 6 points or 7 points usually are very good. But now having gotten the 6 points, I think they'd be going for 9, of course. It, goes without saying. I think that they're going to be going for the win. But yeah, we thought this might be, a series of matches, West Ham, Brentford and Aston Villa, where points might be dropped, and nothing dropped so far. Obviously, the games before that was won as well. So on a fantastic run at the moment. I said it last week. Seems like Eddie Howe, everything he touches at the moment, turns to gold. Really, really, of all the top teams, I think that are vying for those third and fourth places in the title in the Champions League race. Newcastle seem to have the best momentum, I think, and the best form. So
Titan as well.
Yeah, obviously Villa themselves are playing very well. I will get to that, I think. But yeah, at the moment, you really couldn't ask for more from Newcastle.
2 form teams, so looking forward to it. It's going to be a fantastic fixture tomorrow. You mentioned Aston Villa there, so time to catch up with our guest. Put it to Neil Cox, everything that I've put to you. Here's what he had to say. As mentioned earlier, who better to speak to for such a big game than a player who's wore the claret and blue, the famous claret and blue himself. It's a large welcome to the podcast for Neil Cox. Neil, how are you?
I'm not too bad, thank you. Not too bad at all.
Great. Listen, we were just saying, just chatting, you've been to Villa Park, you've seen them very recently, so who better to basically look at what's going to be an absolutely cracking game in store at the weekend, isn't it?
Well, it's a massive game as well. Obviously, they're getting close to each other. Newcastle are in full form. Aston Villa are in good form. Aston Villa need to win to close that gap down between the both sides. And then it's going to be unbelievable atmosphere, because I went to Villa Park against Nottingham Forest and the atmosphere was unbelievable. So I'm expecting Newcastle fans to turn up as they usually do. I think it'll be a great day.
And there's Needle there as well. It's a funny one, Aston Villa and Newcastle. They shouldn't have that history, but they have because of the relegations a few years back. But so that will include into the atmosphere, because there's always a bit of banter between the Holt end and the away end. But listen, it's going to be, when you say Villa Park, it conjures up to me. That's tradition. That's where I want to see the semi-finals, the atmosphere, the Holt end. Really looking forward to it. But on the Black and White with Arab News podcast, just wanted to get your thoughts on the season so far of Newcastle United.
Well, they're flying high, third in the league. They've been to a cup final. Their players are playing out of their skins for the manager and for Newcastle. And you can just say the place is back buzzing again. When I was playing against Newcastle, there's a fear factor of, oh no, we've got Newcastle coming into town, or we've got to go away to Newcastle. And I think that's brilliant for the football club. And it's good to see that they're back on the upward spiral.
It's brilliant. You say that fear factor. You can imagine it from a fan's perspective. We, as Newcastle fans, we love an evening game, or we love a Sunday live on Sky. I think most clubs probably do, but it is jumping. So does the fear factor play a big part in that, going to St James's?
Yeah. I remember at St James's when you go in there, you had a fear factor. Just driving the coach up there, you could just see all the black and white shirts waiting for you to arrive, and the stick and the banter was flying. And then, as you say, on a Sunday afternoon or even a Tuesday night at St James's Park, the atmosphere was electric. And I think it got away from that. Obviously, chairman, an old chairman was involved, and the atmosphere wasn't the same. But now the atmosphere is unbelievable again, and you see it, and it's packed. And I'm hearing there's 20,000 people waiting for season tickets, and I think it's just brilliant for the North East that they're flying again. And I think it's good for football because everybody wants to see Newcastle doing well. Nothing better than going down to Wembley and seeing all the Newcastle fans in Trafalgar Square and celebrating and behaving themselves and just enjoying themselves. And I think that's just good and just what football needs at the moment, that realisation that the North East teams are coming back and doing really well.
Brilliant, and well said as also tidied up at Wembley after themselves as well. Couldn't believe that, but brilliant stuff. Listen, you mentioned Eddie Howe there, so let's take it all the way back to the beginning. We believe, if reports were correct, that Unai Emery was first choice at Newcastle, and now he's in the home dugout for Aston Villa this weekend. But what are your thoughts? What he achieved so far? I mean, it's incredible.
He's changed Aston Villa a little bit. Obviously, under Steven Gerrard, Aston Villa are a bit open and a bit flying around and just being not really defensively minded. Emery's brought that defensive, solid base to it and a possession-based football team that if we win 1-0 or if it's a draw, I'll be happy with that. He's brought that mentality into the football club. He's got everybody, even from a centre forward, defending really, really well. And that's what he's getting ready for. He'll be ready for Newcastle to come in. Newcastle will come out all flying and attack, and I think he'll be ready for the counter-attack with Watkins, who's got pace to get in behind.
Do you think that's the way it'll go, Neil? Do you think that Villa will allow Newcastle to come onto them and press?
I think so. I think that's why Emery wants to play. I think he's more of a defensive, no disrespect to him, he's more defensive-minded. And with the players he's got, I think he's got a lot of pace. It'd be interesting to see Bailey's fit. Obviously, I've seen reports this morning that he's back in training, but he came off with a hamstring against Nottingham Forest. So it'd be interesting to see his fit. But Watkins is playing really well at the minute, playing on people's shoulders, running in behind, causing trouble, scored again at the weekend. He's full of confidence. And I just think the way they'll want to play, they'll sit back and make sure Newcastle can't get in behind them, and then they'll go for a counter-attack. It's
an interesting one you say, play. I think Newcastle, that's if you want to get at Newcastle, I think that's the way to play the Watkins way. I know Nunes from Liverpool had a similar a spell at St James's Park when we played Liverpool. He did exactly that. So, and also I think that they still, Newcastle, for all their brilliance, they're still susceptible, even though they've got that fantastic defence, to the counter attack. So it will be a fascinating face off. Listen, there's no doubt it's the game of the weekend in the Premier League in terms of form. I think it's both 5 on the spin, which is absolutely incredible. If Villa win, by the way, as you were just hinting at the start, it's game on for Villa and possibly Europe, because they'll only be 6 points behind the Toon then.
Yeah, they're 6 points behind and flying. I've just had a quick look at the fixtures remaining. I mean, Aston Villa have got some tough games. So have Newcastle. They've got some tough games. And there's no easy games in the Premiership. Doesn't really matter. And we keep hearing when they come to the last 10 games, the last 5 games, it gets tricky. That's where the prizes are given out and everything's under pressure. So I just think, looking at the weekend, after seeing Aston Villa at the weekend, Nottingham Forest caused them all sorts of problems, but just lacked quality. The final third, they lacked some serious quality. I just think at this time, I think Newcastle have too much for Aston Villa on this weekend.
Interesting. So, as far as tactics go, and this is my favourite part, speaking to players who played at the highest level, by the way. Where do you see Saturday's encounter being won and lost?
Well, I just look at the midfield player battle. There's going to be a battle in there. McGinn for Aston Villa likes to put his foot in, rugged, hard-working midfield player, loves the tackle. I just think it's going to be won and lost in the midfield. Newcastle use their rotation system and get players in the holes and will cause Aston Villa problems. Because Nottingham Forest did. Aston Villa was keeping possession. They kept getting caught. I just think the midfield players is going to be a battle. And then it's all about the wingers for Newcastle for me, because you look at Aston Villa's fullbacks, they're really good going forward. Defensively, I worry about them.
You say that midfield area as well. There's a couple of players from the 2-0 love a tackle. Joe Linton, he likes collecting cards as well. He's already amassed 9 and done his ban.
Yeah.
But Bruno Guimaraes, he likes to tackle a bit similar to John McGinn. Similar ilk actually. They don't mind a tackle, but boy, they can spray the ball around. So
yeah,
it's gonna be a fascinating midfield battle.
The battle will be in midfield, as you say. Whoever can overrun the midfield and step onto to going forward, that's where the game's going to be won. And I just look at the moment, Aston Villa lack a little bit of quality. As you say, we don't know the side. There's a lot of reports of people unrest at the football club and people not happy because they're not playing. You look at Newcastle, all news coming out of Newcastle at the minute, it's all positive. And it's good to hear because over the years, all I've heard is Newcastle doing this. It's negative news. At the minute, it's just positive news. The manager's bringing even the football club are bringing it on. And as you say, when the Toon Army turn up in their numbers, it's all positivity. It's all good humour, and it's good to see that they're right at the top of the game, pushing to get into the top 4.
It makes this podcast easier as well, Neil. Listen, I wanted to say to you, you're talking about cutting edge up front, and Newcastle. You mentioned the cup final and that period. Although it was Manchester United and then they faced Liverpool and Man City, they were the 3-game spell where they didn't look great. Goals were difficult. They've seemed to have turned that corner. As a champion of the defenders committee, what do you make of Alexander Isak?
Oh, he looks like he's going to be, not just now, he's playing really, really well. Got pace to burn. Looks like he's got a really good edge with him. He scores goals. I think for the future, he's only going to get better. Yeah. I think he's going to get stronger, play more Premiership games, play at the top of his level. Probably playing Champions League next year will make him improve even more. It wouldn't surprise me if Newcastle don't go buy another centre forward in the summer to put more pressure on more people because they've got the finances. But I think the manager will buy sensibly, something that's going to fit into the way they want to do it. I can only see him getting better. And as you say, the more players Newcastle bring in, the better the squad they have, the better they're going to want to have a chance to be number 1 spot.
As we always do with our guests, much to Danny Simpson a couple of weeks back, his disappointment, he said he knew I was going to put him on the spot, so we're going to do the same with you. But we do have to take a prediction from you. Danny Simpson struggled. We got him to do Manchester United, Newcastle, and of course he's a Man United lad, so he took Manchester United. So we're putting Neil Cox on the spot. Predictions for the score: Aston Villa, Newcastle United.
I am going to go with Newcastle to win 2-1. I think they'll have too much for Aston Villa, and I think defensively, Aston Villa will struggle. And I think the way Newcastle play at the minute, I think they're just there they're going to go for the win.
I think they will go for the win. Listen, it's been absolutely fantastic catching up with you, the one and only Neil Cox. Brilliant to see you.
Good to see you. Appreciate that.
AK, some fascinating insight from our guest, who thinks that the Toon will just have too much for Villa. I see it as a bigger test than Brentford, actually. But what's your take? Coxie doesn't seem to think so.
No, I agree. I think it is a bigger test. Do you remember last week with John Richardson as well? He said the same thing. We were focusing on the Brentford game, and John said it's the Villa game that concerns me a little bit more, and he's right. I think I know it's easier to say that in hindsight, having beaten Brentford, but John did say it before the Brentford game. Villa are playing really, really well. I think Emery has got them playing good brand of football. They're quite dynamic. They move the ball around relatively quickly. And I think they're like Newcastle. They're on a great run of form. They're playing at home, of course. And suddenly out of nowhere, they see, in the last 3 or 4 weeks, suddenly they see they've got their chance for European football. So it's not just it's not an end of season game where they go away and they're playing against a team that's hit a bit of form, who's not under pressure. I think Villa have their own targets. They're really not that far behind. So I think of the 3 games, the 3 away games, this will be the toughest.
Ali, does history suggest there's needle there between Aston Villa and Newcastle on the terraces? Does that contribute to a factor before the game? Because the players, and I know Villa will be, but I know from Newcastle players, the Newcastle players are very in tune with the Newcastle fans, very in tune. Yeah. So they won't forget as do the Toon fans of the when Newcastle were relegated. They've got long memories, fans. The sub on the Tyne banner that was on the Holt end. So does that play a factor in the game? Ramp it up.
I mean, I would suggest, superficially, yes. I mean, you mentioned the players being in tune with the fans. You look at someone like Bruno Guimaraes, and he seems to have a really good, connection with the fans. And, you can imagine that the fans will say, yeah, you got to go and beat them for us, and the players will take that on board, I mean, they will be aware and quite rightly should, especially maybe, the players who haven't been there long enough, which is the majority of the squad, or people who haven't been in English football. So, they get in tune with any rivalry or any particular incidents that have happened in the past. But on the day, you would imagine Eddie Howe would be, leading up, it would be very, very professional, and they didn't get to where they are now, by being, over emotional and anything. I think Eddie Howe, has done such a great job. But you really look at this season, and whenever there's been any sort of setback and all that, they really do take every game as it comes. There was that setback, the Carabao Cup final, lost to City after that. They had lost to Liverpool before that. And you thought, maybe they could struggle now. But they always seem to find a way to come back, from setbacks and all that. And I think he's very, very professional. And yeah, these things are always great for the fans. But on the day, I think Newcastle will be quite... Keep emotions
in check. Unlike this week's episode of Ted Lasso, if you know, you know. Listen, possible team news, Ali. It's a blow. Maxi's out for 6 weeks. He's finally starting to look the part as well, given the fact he's obviously been told that he's got a role to play. And fair play to him. We've had enough, shall we say, semi-criticism of him, but I'm big enough to say he really has risen to that challenge from Eddie Howe and Jason Tindall. But some welcome news that Miggy is back in training early.
Yes. First on Alan St. Maximin, I think you're right. He has been very, very good recently. And, it had become a bit of a cliche, really, no end product and all that, which is, a lot of the time is unfair. But, it's such a unfortunate time to get injured, because not just because it's just the run-in and because he's been playing so well, because I think now all the talk of possibly him leaving Newcastle might resurface because he had gotten himself in a position where he was playing really well back in the team, and we were talking last week. I think we were saying Eddie Howe would want to keep him, any ideas of selling him, he might, will be shelved now and he'll keep him. But I think this just not through no fault of his own, obviously he's injured, but, people will be talking about replacements. People will be talking about, well, this, he's not going to play much from now till the end of the season. So, this will be the time when people will be talking about transfers and moves for new players.
Good
and
point.
Yeah, I'm going to say I fear for him, but, it's just a really bad time for him to get injured, he really put himself on the stage, saying, look, this is what I can do. And he gets injured. But yeah, Almiron back.
Big call. I fear for you on Twitter if that comes to fruition with the hashtag NUFC. But it's a very valid point, Ali. And it's something that looking at it through, as you quite rightly say, circumstances a funny issue in football.
Yeah.
And fate plays its cards. So that is a one to watch, and we'll mark it on this podcast. Sorry, you were saying about Miggy.
Yeah, Almiron, again, has such a good season. One of the players that at the start of the season we
still top scorer, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, we one of the players we kept saying, well, before even before Alexander Isak joined, we were saying, that too much pressure on Callum Wilson to carry, the burden of goal scoring by himself and all that, So we were calling for midfielders to chip in, people who, who have been at the club for a while, basically to step up and help in the goal scoring stakes. And he did. He's had a great season. Yep. They've been sort of in patches, the goals, but they've all been important. And having him back, I think, is timely. considering what's happened to Alan St. Maximin. And I think he's, he's been one of Newcastle's players of the season, really.
Yeah.
In a season where everybody's been playing well anyway. So that's great news, I think.
Good energy as well, hasn't he? Brilliant energy.
Yeah.
Never stops. So it's all part of the Eddie Howe DNA. Listen, just love a stat as much as you do as well. But I read it every day this week. Isak 5-5, Wilson 3-3, on fire as well. So brilliant. Listen, let's turn to the opposition. We asked our guest about it. I have to say, I was quite surprised at the fact that he was lauding Newcastle, but he was at Aston Villa last week and he said they struggled in large parts against a poor Forest team, and if Forest had more about them, Ali, that they would have punished Villa. So are you impressed though nonetheless at what Unai Emery has achieved at Villa? It seems to be does have that defensive lineup, and what I wanted to put to you, someone that we know very well, he plays on the counter. Is that a la Rafa?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point. I think I am very impressed by what he's done, because he's an excellent manager who's had so much success in Spain and in Europe. And again, I've mentioned
Europa Leagues, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've mentioned this before on the show that sometimes, Premier League media and Premier League fans, shall we say, like somebody is not a success, an immediate success in England, gets tarnished or, gets their reputation a little bit like battered, really, in the way that Emery did at Arsenal. People make fun of the way he talks and all that. Just nonsense. This is an experienced, accomplished manager. As we know, Newcastle had him on their list as well,
Absolutely.
So, I mean, not to be taken lightly at all. And he's proven that. And I think, look, I mean, fair point about they didn't play that well against Nottingham Forest, but you have to be fair. And what applies to Newcastle applies to Aston Villa. We said Newcastle are finding a way, even when they're goal down or not playing too well. So it applies to Villa as well. They are finding a way game after game to win it. So I do think Newcastle are just in better form than Villa, but marginally, because again, Villa are playing really well and scoring winning quite a few games in a row. Yeah. So I think he's done a great job. I mean, and when you consider, like sort of the attention Steven Gerrard got when he was at Villa, there was a lot of, talk like Steven Gerrard came down from Rangers, where he was quite successful and all that. I'm a big fan of Steven Gerrard as a player. Things didn't work out for him at Aston Villa. But, Emery's come in and done a fantastic job, and I think deserves a lot more respect just across his career, not just for what he's done here at Villa, for what he's done. I think people are starting to realize that now. In terms of style, you mentioned, yeah, I mean, I think, again, I do find them quite dynamic when they do the breakaway, Pete. They move the ball around quickly. They can put teams under pressure. It's not like a ponderous team, and that, I guess, if you're going to be successful playing counter attack, then I guess it's just common sense, really, that you need to be quick on the break. So it could cause problems. And yeah, I'm a big fan of Emery, I have to say.
Okay. Bookmark this segment of the show, because this is where I bring up your constant ability to predict and to say what you feel. And as a sports editor, it's priceless. But you've stated for a long time now, way before any of our colleagues in the media, that NUFC have more than a great chance of securing Champions League football next season. You have been banging that drum consistently. So for that, I doff my cap off to you. Callum Wilson believes it's in the Toons' hands. His podcast this week with Antonio West Ham, great listen, by the way. He said, looking at it now, where they are, the stage of the season, that they would possibly regret not getting there, given what they've achieved at this point this season, which echoes what you said.
Absolutely, 100%, mate. I mean, look, it's easy for me to be really confident about Newcastle as a neutral. Well, we are a Newcastle podcast, and I know obviously a lot of our guests are have links to Newcastle, other ex-players or fans. and nobody wants to be, overly confident. People don't want to jinx it and all that. But purely from a football point of view, I think it became clear really just around, before the World Cup that, there's a really good chance for Newcastle to qualify for the Champions League next season. And obviously when they got to the Carabao Cup final, there was a lot of talk about, would you rather finish top four? Would you rather win the cup and all that? Which is a little bit of fun, and most people say, we would just want a trophy, quite rightly, and all that. But really, if you think about it, I wouldn't say it's a nonsense question, but it's an irrelevant question. Because had they won the Carabao Cup and then not qualified for the Champions League, sort of the glow from winning a trophy would still be there, but there would be disappointment, no question.
Look at Man United. Look at Man United now. That's long gone, that trophy.
Yeah,
people have forgotten it, and now they're on their own troubles again. So I agree.
Yeah, I mean, that glow will fade. I think it would have, with Newcastle, it would have lasted longer because it's the first trophy in a long time. I get that point. However, I think, the idea that people say, well, if you'd given me this at the beginning of the season, finishing sixth and winning the Carabao Cup final, I would have taken it. That changes throughout the season. I mean, yes, you get that, I get the logic behind it, of saying, well, we're ahead of schedule in terms of our development and all that. However, having got yourself into third place, having got yourself into a position to finish in the Champions League places, especially this late on in the season, you drop out of it, you're going to be disappointed, regardless of what happened before, regardless of what your expectations were. So I think Callum Wilson's absolutely spot on. I think it's quite refreshing to hear a player say that, and not just saying, keep saying, the same tired lines of we're ahead of schedule, or we'll take each game as it comes. He's absolutely right. Newcastle are in a position right now to finish in the top four, play Champions League football. Anything less from this point going on forward, I don't want to put too much pressure on, but anything less would be a disappointment now.
Absolutely, 100% agree. Listen, as a man with the initial A as his first name, who is in red hot form at the moment, I'm not talking about Alexander Isak. I'm talking about Ali Khaled with his predictions. So give us a prediction for the weekend.
I mean, we've been on a good run, both, as you say, Newcastle and West. I've called, I did say 3-2 last week, and I'd say John Richardson called it spot on. He said 2-1, so
yeah.
Well done, John, but I'm going to go for, they've been on a fantastic run now. Was it 5 wins in a row? Is it for Newcastle? Yep. I'm going to go for another win. I think they're playing so well. Villa themselves are playing well, but I think it'll be another win for Newcastle. I'll go for Villa 1, Newcastle 2.
Great stuff. We'll take that. Absolutely fantastic. Great episode, by the way. Great to catch up with. I do like that opposition. It gives us an insight into what we can expect from the opposition's perspective. So great to catch up with Neil Cox. 500 games at the top level as well. Great guy. That's it for another episode of Black and White with Arab News, and from him, Ali Khaled, the sports editor of Arab News. Fantastic to see you as always. We'll be back next week for another episode. Until then, how are the lads?